Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Welcome back to Snakes and Otters. This is episode 115.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair. The guys have been nice to me once again. And allowed me to do a episode that was kind of in my wheelhouse.
Hey, I've been anticipating this episode for like a year.
Really?
I'm excited for this one.
He named it. Of course he's been anticipating.
Well, that's right. He's the one that named it. Yes, kiss his drunk Russian ass. Even though you're not Russian. And
I mean, that's Boris Yeltsin.
That's right. Yeah,
that's put it in the mouth of Boris Yeltsin.
That's right.
Then it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, kiss my drunk Russian ass.
Absolutely, because we're going to talk about the 3 days in August of 1991 specifically. But it's the coup attempt was just one piece of the entire fall of the Soviet Union and the change of everything that had happened. It was a watershed moment for us. Anybody in our age?
Oh yeah,
we never expected ever that anything like this. We were taught to hate the Russians, the Soviets. I try to use the word Soviets for everything.
At the time, though, they were synonymous.
They were correct. That's right. Yeah, we would never thought that we would ever need to differentiate.
Yeah, but this was that moment that it was like, wow, what's happening?
That's right.
We just
This was bigger than the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Very much so.
Yeah. And that was huge.
That was huge.
That was massive. And I remember watching that on television.
Yeah, and some of that was the result from that.
Oh yes.
But what happened in 1991, here's the irony of the entire concept. 3 days in 1991, Gorbachev is deposed, and a hardline group of plotters, Boris Yeltsin would call them pushtists, if I can get the German pushtists, yes, out of my mouth here, attempted to bring back the hardline Soviet communism.
Right, and so it's good that you put that way as attempted, because they were almost very stereotypical Russian.
In the worst sense of the word.
In the worst sense of the word, because, as we know, Russians don't take a dump without a plan.
I knew that was going to come up. I knew.
But on the other hand, these guys had the worst plan ever, because it was almost no plan at all. And they really were not as organized as they needed to be.
It was that there was a lot of irony on that. They really thought, I do believe, they were a gang of 8. Right. And we'll talk a little bit about some of them. We don't need all of them because most people in the West don't know any of them.
Right. Yeah. The keys who are part of it probably they're important, but the names won't mean anything.
No, there's really 3 guys that really are at the core of this.
Well, let's set it up with just the tiniest bit of background. So, because what you've got is the 80s come, Reagan's putting the pressure on.
Right.
He's talking about dumping the policy of détente.
Right.
Which goes back to Henry Kissinger in the 70s and all this, and even before. And talking about SDI. And so the kind of the last of the hardliners dies in what, 82?
Well, 83 is when Yuri Andropov, who was he's a complicated individual.
He was a KGB guy, though, right?
He was the chairman of KGB, correct. And he was, at the height of their power in the 70s, he was the KGB in many respects. That becomes significant later because it's his disciple who is at the top of this entire piece.
But he dies, and there's this breathing space of Gorbachev.
Not quite.
Chernenko,
that's correct. Yes, that's right.
Because actually Andropov, even though he was KGB, I remember him being looked upon as a great improvement over Brezhnev.
Correct. Brezhnev was, looking back on it now, Brezhnev was a bit of he was a putz. He really didn't have much power. He really thought we were afraid of him a lot, but really he was a bit of a lazy guy. He just...
kind of sleeping.
Well, look at that nose. He drank a lot of
vodka. That's right.
Lots of vodka.
That's correct. Yeah, Brezhnev was not... he did not have...
He wasn't the 18.
No, he was not. But he was the last guy standing. And he was, in the early days, right after, Khrushchev, he was able to get it together. But see, Russians don't like change. Yeah. They want a strong man in position. Very German in many ways. We've talked about that when we talked World War I.
I think most Russians might take offense at that.
Oh, well, now that's correct. But that's,
I think even back then they might have taken offense.
But that explains where Putin is.
That's exactly right.
He took advantage of that desire for the strongman that they
it's not the desire for a strongman. It's being compared to the Germans.
Oh, I'm sorry. Got you. Well,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah. Well, there's an irony for you. That's right, because the hatred of the Nazis and the Germans, it still exists even today.
Right.
Because the grandchildren and great grandchildren, they don't forget those sort of things.
There's a kind of a succession, kind of rapid succession. Brezhnev dies.
And
Andropov was only around for a short time.
And Andropov actually wanted Gorbachev, who is much younger.
Yes.
He actually wanted Gorbachev as his successor. And it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Konstantin Chernenko, who was actually number 2 guy, he almost got it when Andropov ascended. But he ascends for like 15 months. He's terminally ill when he ascends, believe it or not. That's something that wasn't generally known at the time.
But yeah, Gorbachev is 20 years younger than
Very
the
much
rest
so,
of the guys.
and a totally different...
Because he wasn't around at the time of the revolution.
That's right.
Like the rest of them at the early days of the kind of the Civil War, the
That's
whites
right.
versus the reds, and all the way through 1922. And
That's
all
right.
that.
Yeah, none of that's all
So
gone.
Gorbachev is a whole new generation of leadership.
That's exactly right. I mean, he's born around World War II.
Yeah.
Right. He's totally.
He's the next generation.
Yeah.
In many, many respects. And I'll say this much: Gorbachev is either sainted or detested by most people in history, depending on what side of the political aisle you fall on. He's actually
But which political aisle? Because the U.S. political aisle is not the same as the Russian, the German, the French.
That's
or the
correct. I was about to go there. That's right.
And we'll get to all this, but he's sort of one of history's biggest losers.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
While at
Yeah.
the same time, he could have been one of history's biggest winners.
Well,
He could have been George Washington.
in many respects,
he just isn't.
he was both. He had, but despite himself,
Yeah.
because the change and the fall of the Soviet Union could never have happened without his ascendancy and his bringing
Right.
forth of perestroika and glasnost, the policy of being open.
But that's the thing, though. That's why I agree with Martin that he falls more on the side of the loser. Yes, he was successful with glasnost and perestroika, but the problem was he never wanted the dissolution of the Soviet Union. He wanted to transform
Correct.
the Soviet Union.
He let go of the reins and didn't realize that the horse would run off without him.
Right. Which he was probably counting on that they like a strong leader. But the
Yeah.
problem is, by letting go of the reins, he was no longer a strong leader.
Yeah.
There's some
And
of
this
that.
new union treaty, which was basically a Russian libertarian's dream, basically.
Yeah, that's it.
It was devolving a lot of the central power to the republics, which really is a good thing.
It was a fait accompli anyway because they were already breaking away. This was an attempt. It had all
Well, Eastern
happened.
Europe, none of the republics had broken away.
Right. Well,
This is prior to that.
they were.
This is what let them do it.
The new Union Treaty was to be signed by Gorbachev on the 19th of August, 1991.
Yeah.
He was in the Crimea,
Yeah. But so
knowing
Gorby,
they was going to change it from the USSR, from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, to the Union of Soviet Sovereign Republics.
Right.
That's that moment. That it's a little bit deeper than that.
yeah, but he's
He's expecting to still retain power.
That's correct, yes.
He's out there again promoting this new openness, this glasnost and perestroika, and he's meeting with Reagan, and he's opened the wall, and
Russia has an election in June of that year.
Yeah, and the INF
Boris Yeltsin becomes the first president of Russia.
Yeah.
That's really what did him in. He couldn't do that. You can't have, for better or worse, there can only be one leader.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened by allowing the Russians to Russia itself to create
All of them. But yes, Russia, because
Russia.
it's the dog that...
Yeah, it's the dog that wags the tail,
Yeah.
tail that wags the dog. Yeah, that's correct. Once that happened, you have to have Yeltsin's goodwill, but he didn't realize that. He thought Yeltsin would be just one more seat at the table.
And he probably brought a very fallacy dominated view of what the USSR would be as sovereign republics. I guess, because obviously I don't know the man's mind, but I'm guessing he's looking at this as this is the Russian United States.
Exactly.
Where the president of each of these republics is simply a governor.
That is
subordinate to
the will of the Supreme
national
Soviet.
government. Which, if the founders heard me say that, would say, no, that's not at all what we intended, but that's really what it has become.
Yeah, that's right. And that's
Probably what he's looking at as the model.
Very much so. And because
but he still wanted to be at the top of the model.
That's correct.
And their experience though is still very much this Politburo, Presidium, these committees.
That's right.
And kind of, he's the, what they used to call in the mafia, what is it, the
Consigliere?
No, the
capo. The capo di tutti capi.
Yes, the capo di tutti capi, the boss of the bosses.
That's correct. That's what he wanted.
And a mafia reference for Russia is pretty apt, but
it really is. But you know what? What an interesting thing. We talk about apt references in Russia. The most pure form of capitalism, in my opinion, exists in Russia, in the black market. It is because it is literally caveat emptor, buyer beware, and whatever the public wants, the public will get one way or the other.
It's very Ferengi-like.
Yes.
Yes.
It is both the purest and the worst form of capitalism.
That's correct.
In what was the Soviet Union.
Yeah, because it becomes a
truly
league of oligarchs.
Well, it's truly an unregulated economy.
Right.
As any black market is. Black markets are, by definition, the most pure form of capitalism.
So you get to 89, 90, 91. Of course, Reagan leaves office. You got President Bush comes in.
Right.
They're loosening up the reins. Eastern Europe is breaking away.
Right. Reagan had that famous speech in front of the wall saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." That was watershed.
Yeah. It was, yes.
And then it actually happens.
And then it happens.
And Gorbachev is riding this wave and not realizing he can't really control it.
It's not a wave. He's riding the tiger.
He's riding the tiger, yeah.
Well, that's right. And he does his very best to use the systems that he has in place, which, of course, is what he knows. He's expecting the ability for communism to rule this, because that's what everybody knows. But once you start having democratic elections, the people don't choose that.
Right. Once you have a say and you have an option, after 70 years of having no options and no say,
that's right.
Of course they're going to pick the other guy.
And, of course, in Yeltsin's case, there were actually 6 people that ran against Yeltsin. It was basically a free-for-all to get it. And he's the one that comes to top. He was an outsider. He was actually kicked out of the Politburo before.
Yeah.
Even tried to commit suicide at one point. But he became seen as this man.
And didn't get helped. Because that's usually what they...
Yeah.
It was usually
because he was not necessary. He was seen as kind of this, I don't want to say a buffoon, that's too strong.
He was no Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, no. Yeah, well, there's a...
Yeah, because usually in Russia you fall in a bullet 4 times.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah, but Yeltsin, the people really believed in him, and they saw him as a complete different thing. And it got so much so, you talk about Gorbachev not being able to control what was going to happen. He's basically willing to say yes to anything that happens. Yeltsin is brought in June. In July, and irony of ironies, Gorbachev asked for the wiretap. I'll tell you that right up front. But there's a wiretap that the KGB has put on the conversation that happens between, it's actually on July 26th, I can give you the date, where Gorbachev and Yeltsin are talking about what this new Union Treaty is going to look like. And Yeltsin's pretty much basically telling him how it's going to be. He's telling him where the bear sits, and he says, all the old guard guys are out. We're going to start this thing fresh. Well, the KGB is recording this. Vladimir Kryukov is the head of the KGB. He is probably the main player of this entire thing here. He was a disciple of Andropov. And Gorbachev raised him to the head of the KGB in '88. He's been there about 3 years. And he was seen as a disciple of Gorbachev into perestroika, but he discovered very quickly that that dog don't hunt. And he became one of those silent dissenters. He writes his memoirs years later and just savages the entire concept. But at the time, he was being a good little boy. Until he hears on the wiretap that all you guys are out, including him. And that's when he says, no, we're going to fix this.
So
Gorbachev, non-Red Dragon.
That's right.
Gorbachev takes a vacation to his dacha.
It's called Foros. It's on the Black Sea in Crimea, and he had this built like 3 or 4 years earlier. It's like a state palace. In fact, there was a bit of a scandal because of the old cost overruns for that. But that was his, and he would do this every year in August. Which, ironically enough, George Bush would do the same in Kennebunkport. It's not an unknown thing.
You leave Washington in August because it's damnable.
That's right. Teddy Roosevelt was doing it. They've all done that.
Yes.
And that's just when you do that. That's when all the folks take their vacations. Well, Gorbachev is going to do this for a month. And it's right before he leaves that all this conversation happens. This is when Kryukov, along with a man by the name of Boris Pujo, who was the head of the Interior Ministry, and 6 other folks,
We don't care.
You don't need them. That's right. There's a gang of 8 of them. Those 2 are important.
But various hardliners who've been kind of sitting in the weeds.
Well,
they're pissed at the way things have been going.
That's correct. And they've been colluding all this time. And Kryukov was kind of brought into this basically saying, we don't like Gorbachev, do we? We need to get rid of Gorbachev. And that's when he realizes, shit, we're out if we don't do something. And it has to happen because the new Union Treaty was set to be signed the day Gorbachev returns, the 19th of August. He's supposed to come back that week, that day, and that's the next day is when the 20th is when things are going to be signed. That's when the plotters, ironically, only about a week ahead of time did they get their shit together. The man behind all this is Vladimir Kryukov with Boris Pujo, that put their forces together and say, we can do this and take over everything. Another important man that was essential is the head of the army, Dmitry Yazov. He's the marshal. Yeah, you got to have, those are the 3 guys.
I'll give you that one.
Because these are guys that they are ready then to... If they need to, they're going to grab Yeltsin, they're going to grab Gorbachev, and it's going to be right back to the old Lavrenti Beria, the 9mm headache. And
yes, but that's when they realize there's no going back. Is when, once the coup starts, they send somebody down. August 19th is a Monday, when the actual beginning of the coup. They send somebody, Gorbachev's down on a Sunday, they send somebody down, they cut his communications that afternoon to the outside world. So he and his wife, Raisa, and their daughter and her children, they're all there. And basically it's house arrest. They confiscate the nuclear codes, bring them back, and they put in place one more guy I have to mention, who is the kind of the idiot savant no, not even a savant, he's just an idiot. Gennady Yanev. He's the guy that was the vice president. There'd never been a vice president of the Soviet Union until a few months earlier, and it was him. And they had to do this quasi-legal. So he becomes the acting president with the advisors around him. And they end up basically bringing the army that morning to keep the peace in Moscow. But this happens all over.
Well,
all over
like
Russia.
France, the capital is the only important city.
In many respects, you're exactly right. And that's what and that's where they really lose it, is because they have a press conference. It goes back and forth throughout the day. Yeltsin won't shut up. Essentially,
right.
Yeah.
Because they don't have control of the ability to communicate. They don't have control of the Usenet groups.
Right.
They don't have control of what's called medium range shortwave.
Right.
And those things allow Yeltsin, that and occupying the White House, which is the Russian parliament.
Right.
These things allow Yeltsin a platform because he's in a place of power, and that's also going to be very visually and emotionally strong for the Russian people.
Kryukov and his cronies were very worried that it would appear to be a coup. They didn't want the optics. We don't want to paint them too inept on this. They recognize we've got to do this as a coup, but it can't look like it. It has to look like it's a natural source of things, just correcting itself. We're large, we're in charge, we're good guys, and we're just doing the right thing. That was the optics they worried about. The problem is Boris Pujo was head of the Interior Ministry. He's supposed to shut down all the non-state controlled media, which he does, Russian media. But there's foreign media all over the place there. And where it really goes off the rails is that first evening. It's pretty peaceful, actually. Bush has not decided what he's going to do. John Major in Britain and Francois Mitterrand in France, they're kind of watching. Because they realize, if these guys do take control and we piss them off, all of our good work is going down the tubes.
Right. You can't
because you don't know these guys.
You can't.
They knew Kryukov, but nobody else.
Yeah, you can't really throw your support behind Gorbachev too quickly.
That's correct.
Because if he's toast,
and because
you got to kind of leave your option.
And that was all the Western.
It's a shame that that realpolitik has to kind of shoot in instead of being
when we're watching this on television, until Boris Yeltsin climbed up on that tank.
Exactly. At noon that first day.
It always looked like, anything could happen. Mm-hmm. But once he climbs up on that tank...
It was over. Yeah.
And he starts talking to the people.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It was absolutely over. It wasn't like, all right, everybody went home at that point.
Right, no,
but the writing was on the wall.
Because it was
very much a George Washington moment.
It was. And although it could have gone south, there's a couple of moments where it almost did.
Because the only thing left at that point then for the plotters is it's really time to start shooting the crowds.
Almost. They had one. They had one option left that takes place. It's very important. That Monday, that evening, they had scheduled a press conference, and you can see this on YouTube. It's not easy to find because it's in Russian, but it is out there. And you can watch the whole press conference that they scheduled, 6 p.m. Moscow time. Gennady Yanev was in the center. Boris Pujo was to the side. Krykov was not present. Neither was Yazov. For whatever reason, Yazov supposedly wasn't there because they don't want to look like a military coup. Kryukov's absence has been debated all over the place, why he wasn't there. Nevertheless, he wasn't. And it was...
He had a plan to take a dump, and by God, he was going to do it.
Well, that's right. That's right. And what happened is... and Pujo's got this all lined out. He has got folks in there, all the non-state-controlled media has been shut down. Also, all the foreign press media, a lot of them are, Pujo has his people in place to kind of short-circuit anything that goes wrong. It's very, very planned out. He's the one that's done all this. The problem happens when, Yanev looks like an idiot. He tries to comb over his freaking hair to cover his bald spot, and he's sweating, he's got his handkerchief out, he's supposedly the face of all this. So you have all these optics going on, and there's a moment where a young lady who is a member of, and I can't give you the Russian name for the newspaper that she works for, but it was one of those they supposedly shut down. She snuck in. She wasn't supposed to be there. She gets the microphone, and she says in English, basically, so are you going to say that this was a coup d'etat last night that you all performed? Was this more like 1917 or 1964? And of course, after that, it all goes downhill. The plotters had the moment. If they could show themselves in wise control of everything, it would have all gone away. And then Yeltsin could have got up on his tank for all he wanted to, and it would just have seen, he's the idiot.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. Because, as in any coup, in any government, it really is, and this is something that our government is very much supposed to be cognizant of, but despots almost never are.
Right.
Is that you govern entirely by the will of those you govern.
And that's
now,
it.
You may browbeat them into giving their assent, but beyond a certain point, they'll take it away.
That's right.
And
that's what happens.
The Russians were at that point because they had been given a taste of choice. And like I said, after 70 years, of course you're going to pick the other guy because you're tired of this guy. You're tired of everything.
And ironically, it's Gorbachev's policies of perestroika that brings in these free markets. You get McDonald's coming to Moscow about a year and a half before this. And that's just all of a sudden you can choose what you wear. You have a choice in what milk you can buy, what food you can get, and all these things that had been pretty much locked
Reagan
out.
is huge over there. He is a huge, huge celebrity over there. Partially, this is Gorbachev's own fault because he's trying to build a working relationship with him, and they actually apparently had a good relationship.
They did.
Reagan just wasn't willing to give Gorbachev what he wanted, which basically would have let them go on for maybe probably several more years. But
George H.W. Bush had a much more cordial relationship with Gorbachev. He and Barbara, and along with Gorbachev and his wife Raisa, had a very warm relationship that was strongly tested during this time. In fact, that was one of the things when it all finally ended. His was the first call to come through to Gorbachev after they restored communication. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, though.
Gorby, I'm really sorry about that, man.
That's right. Well, because
but you can come visit us at Kennebunkport anytime you want.
By that time, the United States had taken positions, and it was very clear. Right. That first day, we didn't know, but when that press conference went south and went bad south, all of a sudden it was pretty well because George Bush, believe it or not, detested Boris Yeltsin. He thought he was a buffoon. Well, he did, and because he's just kind of come out of nowhere. He thinks, okay, here's your stereotypical Russian and all the bad reasons.
Right. Until
he climbed aboard that tank, and that was done at noon that first day. And they had literally, this is Vladimir Kryukov had ordered in the army,
right?
And they were there,
right. But that's what I was talking about. You still have to have the consent of the governed.
That's right.
And even the army was not going to be behind this because they very easily could have crushed everything.
Well, that was kind of the break point, was they backed away from actually opening fire.
And part of that was Yeltsin and his brass, because that moment when the tanks, there's 3 T-72 tanks that are coming into the White House parking area. Boris Yeltsin, along with several others, moves forward. And he basically says they're not, and he writes this later, they're not going to run over the president of Russia. They're just not going to do that.
Think about it this way.
And they blinked.
This is like that one guy.
It's a
Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, it's a Tiananmen Square moment.
Exactly.
Standing off against those tanks who are trying to avoid running him over, too.
That's right.
But eventually, and I don't think anybody ever heard from that guy again after this is all over,
Right.
unfortunately. But in this case, the guys driving the tanks really did blink.
They did. They stopped because they knew they couldn't do that. And Yeltsin, along with several others, climbs up on the frickin' tank and shakes their hand.
Yeah.
And then shakes his hand into the sky. And of course, this is all over the world.
Oh yeah, this is televised live.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, everything is, they tried to pull it back with the press conference. That fails. So the only thing they've got left, basically, is to storm the place. And that's what starts Kryukov, Peugeot, and the others basically decide, okay, it's called Operation Thunder. And they're going to do it the night of the 20th. They're going to do it at midnight. So Yeltsin is sending out press releases left and right because the foreign press is all over this.
Well, at Izvestia, the main newspaper, they actually threatened to go on strike if they didn't allow his press releases and his speeches and what have you to be printed.
That's right.
Think about that.
That's right.
The people who worked at the major newspaper, state-owned newspaper, were willing to go on strike, which you cannot do.
Right, absolutely. Well, in fact, that's what Yeltsin had called for. That was his first pushback. Was he called for a general strike? It didn't really take off, but that was before the tank incident, and it really didn't need to because he calls for people to rally after rally. You've got 100,000 people in downtown Moscow, basically on the streets, willing to defend this embryonic democracy of theirs. And that's how. And Yeltsin, give him credit. A lot of people don't like him much. He really did seize the moment, and he recognized, people have got something precious here, and we're going to remind them.
Even if he was a buffoon opportunist, he did the right thing.
He did the right thing. It's exactly
That's the thing. So before we go any farther, let's have a bourbon break, boys.
Yes.
We've gone quite a long way here.
And it's not a vodka break.
No, this is not a vodka break.
That's why we decided that. But most Russians really appreciate bourbon. They can't duplicate it, and they know that. But there's still a very
You can't make it out of potatoes.
That's right, and that's one of the things that a lot of Russians really appreciate this unique American alcohol that we make.
I say
here.
we charge them double.
Well, I'm sure there's probably some sort of a tariff on that. I don't know. Just getting it into Russia, even today, is not easy.
Yeah,
they don't.
right.
But nevertheless, it's still possible.
So since I brought it up, I will go first.
Yes.
So, we have never talked about Jim Beam as one of our drinks.
We have not. That's right.
Because it is not considered a higher end bourbon. We tend to stick to the mid to higher range bourbons.
Yeah, we didn't have Rangers.
But my kids gave me for Father's Day this 3-pack. One was and it's a small, like half size of the normal bottles of bourbon. The 375 milliliter, which is a good sampler pack. That's a good way to put it. One was a Basil Hayden's, which we all love.
Yes, love that one.
The other was a 9-year Knob Creek. Another excellent bourbon.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
That's going to be a monster.
And then the third one was this Jim Beam Black Extra Aged. Now, that just kind of blew my mind because, what is this doing with these two things?
Right.
So I decided to try it. Boys, this is smooth as hell.
Well,
This has got a really good taste. It's almost got a little bit of sweetness to it.
huh?
There is no serious afterburn at all. You get a little bit of tingling in the sinuses when you take a little bit of a drink. It's just, I'm really surprised. I like this. This is a really good bourbon. Would never have expected to say that about a Jim Beam just because it's just not one we've gone to before.
Well,
Because like I say, even a bad bourbon is still bourbon.
right.
Come on.
Well, I'm kind of regretting not pouring that now that you've had such this marvelous ecstatic experience here. Well, you got Martin?
The two of us have poured a couple glasses of Robert's Four Roses small batch.
I was going to ask you, what are we drinking? Because you poured it. I don't remember.
We've already sung the praises of Four Roses. This is the small batch.
Yeah.
So this is a step up from what we normally get.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah, it's a little bit
it goes without saying it's excellent, but I like it's got a tiny bit of citrusy to it.
Wow,
a little
I
bit of
picked
sweet.
that up, but yeah, you're right.
A little bit of sweet. Very smooth finish.
Smooth.
Just a little bit of tingle on the tongue and a really good chew.
No burn. No, it's not. It doesn't have that at all. Which
you
is
kick it right back.
Yeah, that's a cool thing.
Which you should never do with bourbon.
No, not at all. But you could.
I mean, you could. I mean, good bourbon.
Right.
Good bourbon should be sipped and enjoyed.
And it doesn't go back to the olfactory senses and all that sort of stuff like that. It just kind of goes down.
Very smooth. Very, very smooth. Yeah, so I just popped the rest of mine down. So
I'm sure Boris Yeltsin would like it.
I'm sure he would.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to trying that because you guys had the first drinks out of that. I've had that sitting up there for quite some time.
Oh, really?
I meant to take it to our last recording session, and I forgot.
Oh.
So it's been waiting for us to try.
Well, here we are.
It's super smooth. Again, maybe just a little orange peel, I guess, maybe, and a little bit of sweetness, and a really good chew.
You're far a better scanner than I am, sir. I can't possibly pull those tastes out. It's just good. I like it.
It's good.
It's very good. It's very good.
Yeah.
Stays in the back of the throat. That's good.
Yeah, kick it right back. It's good.
So let me ask you this, because we could keep going on and on and on, and we don't necessarily need to do that. So I guess the question that the people of our generation were asking, the questions we were asking at the time, those of us who were not too bright were probably caught totally off guard. But I mean, we're all caught off guard. But I think for those of us that were following someone like Reagan and Thatcher and even the Pope in fighting communism, this was the expected outcome at some point. Now, it caught us by surprise in that it happened when it did and how quickly it did.
Yeah.
But is it fair to say that this was truly an inevitable thing? Because, all civilizations, if we count the Soviet era as a civilization, because it was definitely unique unto itself, they all end, they all have their downfall. At some point, even our country will see some sort of fall from its status.
A transition of some sort.
Whether that's into something entirely different or just into a lower tier power. But was this truly inevitable that democracy of some form, I wouldn't exactly call it a perfect democracy now, but they still have sort of elections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it is, but I think we didn't know that until it happened. I think it takes 30 years for perspective to realize just exactly how inevitable this was, but it shouldn't have happened the way it did. It was much quicker, thanks to, ironically, the very plotters who attempted to return back to the way things were, ended up accelerating everything, and all that they were trying to save is exactly what they caused the downfall of.
Well, the actual dissolution didn't happen until 4 months later.
Yeah.
And honestly, you could make an argument that I think you can make the argument that once they made the decision to sign that treaty, that even 4 months later could have still happened on schedule. Maybe not that quickly then, but with the devolution of all that power, all that centralized power to the individual republics.
Gorbachev had planned on being at the top of it, but because of this coup, Yeltsin has risen to the ascendancy. He basically tells Gorbachev the next 2 days, no, you won't do it this way. You're going to do it this way. All the appointments he made to replace those plotters, because they're at the top level, folks, they end up, Yeltsin vetoes most of them. He says, no, you're going to put these guys in here.
Yeah, because Yeltsin really does emerge now
as the force.
As the guy. And again,
that's what hastened things.
How Gorbachev ends up being one of history's great losers, in that if the coup doesn't happen, then he stays at the top. Maybe he works with Yeltsin, and this transformation is gradual. And maybe he gets to hand it off to somebody else down the road, and we still have a sort of Soviet Union. Maybe Putin still ends up in charge of it. Who knows? But the failure of the coup really is this moment of when you can really tip over the whole apple cart.
That's exactly right.
And they do.
Even though Gorbachev comes back, he comes back basically to his own end.
Yeah, I mean, basically,
he comes back basically to do what he did, which is basically oversee the dissolution.
That's right.
Yeah,
because once that happens,
as opposed to a transformation, which is what he wanted.
Right. Well, I think the dissolution, given that treaty, was inevitable.
Yeah.
maybe not 4 months, maybe 4 years.
Yeah, exactly.
But within a very, very short time frame.
Yeah, I mean,
because once you decentralize that amount of power, it's like the Articles of Confederation.
Yep.
You can't do anything at the national level.
Yeah.
Once you have now, I have not looked at the details on that treaty, but I would guess very much that the individual republics had a great deal of control over the military assets in their republic.
That was one of, yes, a little bit, but there was still, that was one of the few things that they wanted to keep together was the common defense, that military aspect. But see, the problem is, you have used the Soviet military in Lithuania that January to try and suppress a revolt. You've done it in Chechnya, you've done it in Georgia, you've done it in Azerbaijan, and a couple, I didn't pronounce that right.
Azerbaijan.
Yes, you've done that on the last few years, not to mention the whole Afghanistan debacle.
Yeah, that's important too.
It's very important here. If all of that had not been the case, you could have made the case for let's stay together for the common defense. But there's no faith in these folks.
Well, this also comes at a time when, just like the U.S., they're looking at what do you do with the peace dividend? Mm-hmm. Because essentially, and it's a little bit early for that phrase to be bandied about, but essentially by now that's what we're talking about, because we are no longer looking at the Soviet Union as the existential threat that it was. Mm-hmm. And certainly after this, we are not.
Right.
Because there is no...
Irony of ironies. It is what ends up defeating the entire coup is, like you said, we're not going to fire on civilians. That's Yazov. That's the field marshal. They were literally, Kryukov they were going to storm the place, they were going to spirit Yeltsin away, and they were going to crank down. And it was Yazov who says, nope, they kill 3 civilians as part of an altercation not far from the White House. When the word gets back to Yazov, he says, shut it down. Kryukov, Pujo, and the other guys go back and says, no, you can't do this. He said, watch me.
Yeah, that's really
and
what
I'm
made
not going
to
to turn into Pinochet, that's a quote from him.
Yeah,
it was the military man. In many respects, what failed that coup was when he decides to throw a set of stones, and says, we're not going to do this.
Yeah.
We don't do this. We don't fire on our own people.
Well,
and it was
which is very much,
that.
That's new. Because absolutely, the Soviet Union does fire on its own people.
And that's correct. But Yazov was
the optics of it going back to looking like the Tsar.
It's political now, and Yazov had a brilliance to him. And irony of ironies, all these plotters themselves would be pardoned by the Duma 2 years later.
Yes,
with the exception of Boris Pujo, who committed suicide at the failure of that.
But
now, did he commit suicide by 4 bullets? By following the 4 bullets?
No, actually, no. It's irony of ironies. He did this. His wife was there. She asked that he shoot her first. She did not want to live without him. Her father was living there with him in Moscow. This is after he gets the call from the prosecutors, and he says one word to him. He says, "Come," and he shoots his wife on her insistence, and then puts a bullet into his own mouth. Her father opens the door and brings them in. She dies like 3 days later in the hospital. She was going to recover it, but she herself commits suicide in the hospital through other means. And she leaves a note for her children saying, I'm sorry, my dears, we have to leave you. Please don't take offense. It's really one of those great tragedies that basically Pujo really believed that he was trying to do the right thing. And it's just...
But the military backing away... That's the heroic moment in addition to Yeltsin, but the military leadership backing off from...
I should say this, that's the army.
Yes.
Because there are 3 different military forces here. The KGB has their own military forces, and so does Interior. That's Kryukov, Pujo, and Yazov. But Yazov's got the lion's share. And when he says, no, we won't, all of a sudden the Interior Ministry forces, against Pujo's orders, well, we're not either. And then the KGB says, well, we're not either. Yeah. And that's when it all falls apart. And
none of them want to be seen as the butcher of Moscow.
I think those guys could see the writing on the wall. Because once you see what's going on, all those people gathered around, you see Yeltsin on the tank, and you're told to go in and basically slaughter everybody to get to Yeltsin, which was never going to work. If they went in, he was going to die.
Well, there's a moment where one of Yazov's subordinates, General Lebed, who was he was head of the airborne forces for the entire Soviet Union. He was a veteran of Afghanistan. He goes and meets with Yeltsin, and he tells him, they're giving the order for us to pull back from around you. The attack is coming. All it takes is a few missiles and this place will go up like the sun. You really need to surrender. And Yeltsin says, no, why don't you join us? And he doesn't. But it's later on that evening, Yeltsin kind of figured out these guys don't want to do this. And shortly after that is when Bush calls Yeltsin, and all of a sudden you've got international recognition and things kind of go off to the point where eventually Yazov says, screw this, we're doing it. But Yazov says, there's only one way out of this, because Yeltsin's going to have our heads. We're going to see Gorbachev. And he convinces Kryukov to go with him. They fly down to Crimea that next day.
Oh, yes.
Very important here.
Yes.
Because at this point, Gorbachev has convinced his personal bodyguard, who is run by the KGB,
Yep.
and the head of that has been co-opted by the plotters. He convinces his own guards to not let these folks in. Literally, they're going to shoot these guys. Kryukov, Yazov, all these other folks. And they literally come to the gates, and the guy who's in charge says, what do you mean you're not going to let us in? He says, we're going to shoot your ass, paraphrased, if you try this. We have orders from President Gorbachev. Go down to the guest house at the bottom and wait. And that's when Gorbachev says, you turn my communications on before I'll talk to you. And of course, once that happens, it's over. And Kryukov and Yazov fly back to Moscow that night with Gorbachev. Kryukov is on Gorbachev's plane as a human shield. They arrest his ass on the tarmac, and he's put in prison. And so is Yazov, and like I say, Pujo commits suicide. And ironically, they released him 2 years later. I still don't get that one. I guess because Gorbachev's out of power at this point. Yeltsin, he's in charge, and yet for whatever reason, they decided to treat them mercifully.
Well,
Stalin would have had him killed. We know that.
Well, there's a valid question here. Can you even hold them? Because if they were presumably put in jail for committing treason against the state, that state no longer exists.
That's correct.
Does the Russian Federation have the authority to hold them? I think that's a valid philosophical question,
and perhaps a legal one too. I don't know if that was. I don't know if that was the basis for their. But the Duma is the one that released them, which is their legislative body. My read of this, having done the research, is they wanted to reconcile all this. They wanted
to give a chance.
They wanted to heal. They wanted to heal this nation, and they said, we're not that which you thought we were. We may have been at one time.
Because a couple of years in, I mean, it's still
this is not Andropov. This is not Stalin.
Yeah. Right.
This is
it's not Putin.
It's not
right. The real test is the second election of Boris Yeltsin to see what, and really even after him, to see if one, they can do it again, have a second election, but more importantly, can they transition?
That's right.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the things that the European powers were looking at us for. What are they going to do when it comes time for Washington to hand over power?
Yeah.
And that had never been done.
That's right.
Other than one king to his son.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that wasn't very smooth either.
And that often wasn't smooth.
Yeah. It usually took somebody dying. This was going to be, I'm out. I'm going to retire here.
Yeah. That's very unique.
That's very unique, and that's right. And that's when you realize things really are different over there from what they were.
Yeah, it's sad that it's all gone down the toilet now,
but not in the same way that it was. It hasn't regressed to back to what it was.
No, not to back what it was. But I think most people in the West get the vibe that if Putin could, it'd be back to the Soviet Union. He may not call it that, but he would very much like to have that.
He's not.
He likes the power. He's not particularly enthralled with the communist doctrine and all that stuff. It's not about that. He wants to be. He would.
The money keeps him in power,
right?
So I mean, that's the thing. They have to keep the oil and gas money flowing in.
He's very much a one strong man leader. That's
he's turned the whole
whatever the trappings are really doesn't matter ideologically.
Yeah. I mean, he's turned the whole joint into a banana republic, basically.
Right. I mean, he had his, because they have a 2-term limit presidency. Well, he did his 2 terms, and then his hand-picked puppet does his term, and then Yeltsin can come back. And Putin can come back, and that's what he does. Which makes a mockery of the whole thing, because he was prime minister or some other.
Right. Yeah. It was. Which
is still a huge amount of power in the system. So it's very much like Martin says. It is almost a banana republic. It's not quite that bad, but the politics really are
yeah, I mean,
strongman.
it
It's
is,
kind of the
and
world's
it's
biggest banana republic.
it's
Yeah.
a very different thing to us.
The
And-
difference is they have nuclear weapons and they have actual natural resources that most banana republics don't have.
Right. I mean, and again, those resources are what's keeping Putin in power because everybody needs them, so he has that leverage.
Which is why fracking and all the stuff we've been doing in this country has been so detrimental to them.
Yeah, oh,
He's
yeah.
had some very dicey moments
yes,
in the past.
the more
5
energy
to 10 years.
production there is outside of Russia, the less dependent Europe is on them, the less power he has.
Right.
So
Well,
it's
less
direct-
money that the state
well,
has
because
as
it's
well.
directly related to that. It's not a systemic thing. It's a power money thing.
Oh, yeah, 'cause,
and that
I mean,
and there's the difference.
He and his buddies control the banks, and they control the export of the oil and gas. And again, the more you shut down energy production elsewhere, the more power he has, and that's the way you counter him.
Well, the enormous. Of course, Russia's the largest nation on Earth. I mean, it's huge, and they have the natural resources that most places can only dream of, and that's nothing new. It's just the system has been.
Well, they're using them now.
Well, I was going to say the system has been greased where they can export these things and they can use them, and these
Right.
things happen.
A lot of what they export, though, probably could be used at home,
Sure, absolutely.
which they, that doesn't make any money, which is why they're not going to do it.
Right.
Right.
But their biggest natural resource is probably their timber, but that's not quite the resource you can exploit like the rest of it.
No,
Right.
it's the oil and gas.
Oil and
Western
gas,
Europe
it's-
needs it desperately, and that's what keeps them afloat.
Yeah.
If they could get oil and gas from another source, Putin would be toast.
Yeah, but it's
Or if
so.
enough countries would put in some good, safe nuclear energy,
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
which
France.
is not an oxymoron.
No, not at all. France was done a lot of that.
Oh yes,
the-
I don't know if it's still true, but at one time France was 85% on nuclear power.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're very close to being right. I can't give you the updated thing anymore.
I'm pulling that number kind of out my rear end, but that's what I remember reading at some point.
You're
This was
exactly
years
right.
ago. So it could have gone either way because plants, the age, they need to be replaced. And if it's anything like in the U.S., getting a new nuclear plant approved is damn near impossible.
Right. Well, we
Hey, you did great, man. You did great.
We
I thought
laid
that
all
was
this out, yeah.
super informative and very lively, and it lived up to my anticipation.
Well,
you did a great job,
I am in
Francis.
awe. I am in awe from that, sir. Yeah, it's a fun thing, and it's the basis for the novel I'm writing. So that's the reason I've done this research, folks. I don't just know all this stuff. I mean, I'm smart, but come on now.
Yeah,
This is.
you picked something here that it is a very important moment in history, and it's a recent moment
And-
that we can get our heads around.
That's right. We should know it.
There's
But
media
we
about
don't.
this.
But we
yeah,
don't.
we don't know zip about it.
But you know what?
the
That's
media-
not that much different from us, knowing in the same way as our parents did about the Bay of Pigs.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
We were not alive for that. So, and even Watergate, most of our memories of Watergate is, where the hell are my cartoons?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You
these
know?
people are talking, and I don't understand, and all I want to do is watch Bugs Bunny.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a big deal for us.
Yeah,
And,
who
that
is
was-
this idiot John Dean that we keep seeing on this television screen all the time?
So, I understand the lack of the younger generation knowing and understanding about this, but, part of it is the history you live is what you're most familiar with, unless you're nerds like us.
Yeah, but man, this changed the world so much. It really
was
did.
so much of a very hopeful, positive moment of, hey, holy cow, all these missiles and all this.
Aren't pointed at us anymore.
It
Or
doesn't-
Well,
the-
that's
we
just
don't
it.
need
They
them.
were.
they were, but the fingers aren't on triggers anymore.
Well,
But they weren't. They're like, if it could have taken hold, it's like none of this is even needed anymore.
that's correct.
We could have taken them all apart, and a lot of them did come up. I mean,
That's right, yeah.
The republics hired us
To come in and, yeah.
come in and get this stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't hire Putin to come and get it; they hired us.
Would have been Yeltsin at the time, but yes.
Well,
Well, I think
over
some of
the
it happened
years,
afterwards.
yeah,
Depends on how long you want to stretch this
yeah,
out.
it did. It took.
Yeah.
It took 20 years.
Right.
But it was this really hopeful super moment in the early 90s when it's like, holy cow,
Maps were changing weekly.
yeah, this could really end the whole Cold War. Could really change the whole world. There really could be peace, like was envisioned at the end of World War
Well,
II.
for about 5 to 10 years,
yeah,
it really was different. The
Yeah.
90s, did not have the threat of nuclear Armageddon hanging over it.
That's right.
But why was everybody so grouchy in the 90s then?
Because we didn't have an external foe.
That's right.
And we turned our animus internal. I really think that's part of it. Because I think the 90s is when things really started, societally, for the U.S., going off the rails in terms of the us versus them.
Well, that's right, because you always have to have a them.
Right. And that's part of the problem.
If it's not over there, it suddenly becomes here.
Right. And when it's over there, it's a lot easier to unite people around a common foe. In our next episode, we're going to be doing Abraham Lincoln quotes. Not to jump on Francis's ending, but Lincoln has a quote about that where he talks about it's very easy to unite people, but you're going to unite them either against the external foe or the internal foe.
That's right.
And I think that's very true. What happened in the 90s?
Yes. Yeah, and it's just like, hey, all you Gen Xers that are younger than us, stop being so down in the mouth. Cheer up. This was a hopeful moment. It really was. Trust us.
Francis, what's next?
Well, you've kind of already talked about
I know,
that.
but we got to say, Francis, what's next?
That's right. No, we're going to do the next two episodes are going to be on Lincoln. We've talked about this for some time, but we're going to do a quotations of Lincoln
for Code of Honor,
and then we're going to talk about the man, the presidency, as best we can do in an hour. My God, I mean, we could do a whole series on Lincoln.
Yes, as much as I like to keep our episodes less than an hour, it's going to be hard to do that one.
Yeah, I don't see how we can do it with Lincoln, but and the man is eminently quotable. And, yes, I mean, I'm very interested to see where we go with this because there's thousands upon thousands we could choose. We're going to pick just 3, and we're going to put those forth to you next episode.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.